Well, good morning. I trust my audio is good. If not, use the chat window and let me know. As a client network engineer for MCNC, I did a series of webinars in the client network and for the client network engineering group and for the K-12 and community college communities. And one time I got about a half an hour into a presentation, and the chat window popped up, and someone said, your audio's not on. And I just about died. So I'm very self-conscious about not letting that happen again. So good morning. It is Friday, November 30th, and this is the CIO webinar series. We're recording these sessions, each of them. There are currently 5 topics planned, possibly a 6th. And my hope is that there will be additional topics in the coming year or years. My name is Kevin Modero. I took over as the community college advocate this past summer after Robin Kimball retired. Today's session is the 3rd topic we have covered, and all of them are going to be, actually all of them already are, available on YouTube. So the recording as well as the slide presentation is available to anyone who wants to have that. So keep that in mind. If you miss something, or you perhaps want to start from the beginning again, or what have you. So the channels will all each topic will be there in the channel, and I'm using the term channel liberally, because there is a specific definition of a YouTube channel, and really what I have is a YouTube playlist. So that is in the hands of Candace Holder at Surrey. I think we all know Candace, and she can make that available to, I think she already has made that available to the whole group, but if not, there's my email address. If you want this video or any of the materials or any of the previous sessions, feel free to email me there. Also very popular in our last session, which was 2 weeks ago today, was the announcement of this product we're using called Zoom and its availability to the community colleges. There's 10 licenses or so that are available to you as we speak. If you email me, and I can get you I can get you to the right the person who actually activates the license, put it that way. They don't trust me with that. So, but you get 10, pro commercial grade licenses for Zoom, and having lived through Skype and even Adobe Connect and some other products, I really like this Zoom. So today's topic is offsite storage and disaster recovery. I hope everyone has at least thought about such a thing. The presentation today will be a mile wide and an inch deep, and we're going to talk about some different strategies, and I'm going to tell you what I see happening in the community that with other colleges that you might not be aware of. I'm going to try and tie that all together with my role as well as the role of other engineers at MCNC, and we're going to look at some options and just kind of talk about what the critical points are. So what's in it for me? Well, at minimum, we want to have reliable backups that are not stored locally and are not at risk for fire and flooding and things like that, or mishandling. I've always been an advocate of, if it's important, store it in 2 places, and if it's critical, store it in 3. And that includes physical locations. So we want to protect our sensitive data, whatever that might be, from disasters on our own premise, or mishandling, or accidental erasure, or malware, which can, as you can see with viruses that affect Windows servers, it can very often, things like code red and things like that can very often quickly permeate throughout the network. So we may not have a reliable server, and therefore any reliable data if we are strictly storing our backups on site. So that means we have high availability. That means we've reduced risk. We are at least handling tape and media storage less these days. We're using virtual tape drives and things like that. But again, we want replicas of those to be off-site. And as we said before, this frees or reduces the risk and frees it from any infrastructure issues that may have happened on our main campus. So is it really worth the trouble? Well, I used to say, 9/11 prompted a lot of people to think about disaster recovery, but more recent events have as well. And we have, it's caused us to rethink, for example, where we make storage available and the locations and things like that. So is it worth the trouble? Absolutely. Just think of what would happen if your data center was here. And so I hope, as I said before, I hope this is something everyone has thought about, and I hope you at minimum are doing backups remote and storing them remotely, but we're going to talk about some other things that I think are important as well. So we have sensitive data on our campus, and typically when we talk about remote storage or disaster recovery, we are pushing it across the WAN to some remote facility. Now, how we do that, and how often we do that, and how much that costs is really the kind of things that we want to start focusing on, starting today, starting with when you see the last slide of this presentation. So we want to go forward thinking about being able to recover from a disaster, being able to recover from the mishandling of our local backups, being able to recover from malware and things like that. But specifically, we also want to think about how do we get our sensitive data across to the remote site. And as you'll see, most of the time, if not all the time, this data goes across the commodity internet in an encrypted form. And although it can be intercepted potentially, it's unlikely to be decrypted. So we have technologies as simple as SSL that get our data to the remote site in a secure fashion, even when it crosses public or third-party internet circuits, as is the case for some of you, and even when it crosses the public internet or commodity internet, where it is somewhat more vulnerable than if we were just sending this data across the NCCCCIO network. So that is a different model. On the campus on the left is using something like Azure or AWS or any of the various backup remote storage solutions. And that data is crossing the internet, and it is doing so in an encrypted form. And the campus on the right is using NCNC to do that remote hosting and the remote data storage, and their data only goes across the NCCCCIO network, assuming we're also accounting for possibly a last mile loop. But for many of you, there is no last mile loop. You're direct connects, and more of you are becoming direct connects as the years go by. There are even more planned for the future. So that takes us to a third model, which I have seen, and I think I've not asked folks for permission to talk about which campuses these would be, but campuses that are literally coming to agreements between themselves, different colleges, I should say, not just campuses, but different colleges that have come to agreements to say, essentially, look, if you store my data, I'll store yours. And in at least one case, and this is possible, I should say, I should go back a step, because they're both direct connect institutions. And direct connect institutions have very low latency from one point to the other, from one college to the other, because they're on the NCCCCIO network, not using commodity internet or anything where that might be oversubscribed and generating additional latency, or making such a plan unfeasible because of that latency or lack of high availability. So some institutions are direct connect, many of you are, and they can simply use one another to host, not just store data, but host virtual machines. They can actually develop plans for disaster recovery. The network the network latency on NCREN is so low, it's essentially like having a DR site in this scenario right here. It's essentially like having a DR site on your local LAN. So this is a very wise strategy, I think, and I'm always in favor of cooperation. And I think what happens in a situation like this is not only do you share backups and host one another's virtual machines, but there's collaboration in other areas that develop as well. So when it comes to disaster recovery, it's not just personal files and email and things like that we want to back up remotely. Disaster recovery, we need to be able to boot up when our MDF goes down on our main campus, and we need to be able to boot up somewhere else, somewhere that has power, somewhere that has IP when we've lost it. And so that means storing more than just data remotely. It means duplicating servers, possibly physical servers, big iron servers, buying them in multitude. It may more likely mean that we need to be able to pop up virtual machines in a remote site, and that those VMs have to be updated frequently. So these are things we will push during off hours in the middle of the night, and make sure that the virtual machines that are being stored remotely can serve our local community just as well as the big iron that we have on our campus, which suddenly might not be available. And that also gets us to think about logical addressing. Somehow clients that understand the server infrastructure to have a particular logical address or logical addressing, and they may have come to learn that through DNS, or they may have that hard-coded, that stuff has to continue to function. So there are a couple ways to approach that, and one is the all preferred way of DNS, that we start looking at our current environments and making sure that we don't have hard logical addresses in our server configurations and our software configurations, all that stuff. Anytime we rely on a hard number, that may not be available or understood or reachable when that server or service is being provided from a remote site. That remote site may have a totally separate logical addressing scheme. So we have to account for that. And as I said, one of the ways we do that commonly is through DNS, because with DNS we can change qualified domain names quickly, and we merely have to wait for the client devices to TTL and relook up those host names, and those students, those staff will be up and running again using the DR site. And another way we do that is we tunnel. So we create, and you'll see this with some of the services that MCNC provides, we will tunnel between the two sites. So anytime, whether that's an encrypted tunnel or not, as we talked about before, it may not even need to be. But when we provide a tunnel, we are providing a virtual layer 2 connection, so that the networks can actually span across that wide area link, and they're understood logically on both sides because of that layer 2 connection, because we're not routing it, because we're not NATing it. And that tunnel can be encrypted in the case of IPsec. It can be unencrypted in the case of GRE. All of those options are available. So all of that means is a high network availability. But the importance of this slide is we have to actually think about the day after the disaster. It's not enough to merely say, yes, we have a DR site, and the servers there kind of look like the ones we have here, and we push backups occasionally. When we're talking about disaster recovery, we need to be able to boot up that DR site, and with an acceptable amount of layover, in the case, for example, DNS replicating back to the client devices, but something along those lines, we want that DR site to function as if it were our main campus MDF. So that's where I see a lot of folks in our community being the 58 colleges. We have something remote. We have some storage remote. We have what we maybe identified at one time as critical services stored remotely. But that ability to turnkey and boot up the DR and continue to provide services almost transparently to the end users is where a lot of us, and I'm here as your advocate, right? So I come from a client network engineering background. I worked with you in that regard doing this. And of course, now I'm the community college advocate. And so I'm still here for you, so to speak. And not even so to speak, I mean, literally. And that's where we need to get. We need to get our DR sites able to provide the same services we have now. And if Hurricane Florence didn't emphasize that, I don't know what else could. We still have colleges providing limited services or reduced service to their users because of Florence, and that was how many months ago. So this is where we need to get. So for NCREN, if you're not interested in, I guess I probably didn't even bring up the third-party commercial services obviously cost money. They operate on a for-profit basis. MCNC provides many of those same disaster recovery and backup storage and things like that, provides many of those same services on a non-profit basis. The system office has not paid for this for all of you yet. That is not part of the agreement between MCNC and the system office as of yet. However, that doesn't mean this isn't something you want to take advantage of. One advantage of using MCNC, full disclosure, I used MCNC for remote storage back in the 90s and early 2000s. And one of the reasons I did that is because I can still drive over and touch the box. And as a network administrator, that was critically important to me. Now, MCNC provides whatever level of service you want. So if you have a server sitting at one of these locations on the NCREN network, you can get, as I said, whatever level of service you want. You can get strictly electrical power and IP, or you can have somebody, patching operating systems and maintaining the server. So it runs the gamut, so to speak, anywhere in between and including those endpoints. But what I always liked was the ability that I can get in the car and go touch the box and do whatever it is I need. I like to be able to get to my stuff. With cloud services, and one could argue these are cloud services, but with private sector cloud services, that's less likely that you're going to be able to do that. Oh, and I should have mentioned, so many of you know we have the remote hosting DR capabilities at the RDP. You may not know about the Pisgah Astronomical Research Institute up in the Carolina Mountains. And these are switched now. So Perry is on your right at this in this slide, and then RDP is on your left. That really should be the other way around. But so Perry is out west, and it was once a government surveillance site. It is now a radio astronomy observatory, and it is linked to NCREN, and it is used by physics, astrophysics, and astronomy students throughout North Carolina who are studying at North Carolina colleges and universities. But anyway, so it's on the NCREN network, and it allows them to have remote control of you can see the scopes there. And again, those are not optical, those are radio telescopes. But it allows them to have remote control. Well, it also allows us to have DR and remote storage ability. So it gives our community, this is a tremendous asset to us, is what I'm saying, I guess. It gives our community an alternative to the RDP. So for those of you, and more than one of you have expressed to me some concern post-Florence that the RDP is too close to the water. And it wasn't. not even close, but in terms of any kind of disaster or loss of any kind, it wasn't. But for those of you who want to get some altitude and some further distance from the ocean, we have Perry, where we can provide all the things we've talked about in the previous slides. So these are some of the things that MCNC will do for you. Simple rack space, and as I talked about, managed or unmanaged. You can get as little as just a 110 volt connection, or you can have everything down to troubleshooting the operating system. So, and anywhere in between. That includes VM hosting. I can't think of a more important development in the science of disaster recovery than the ability to spin up VMs. Something when I talked about, and probably aged myself a little bit, storing things remotely with MCNC back in the 90s, those sorts of things were not available. Storage can be as little as 8 cents for a gig for a month. File level backups are available as well. We talked about tunneling. Probably not critical to you for if you are a direct connect institution, as many of you are. However, you may want that layer 2 bridging availability. The tunneling, IPsec tunneling carries a little bit of overhead with it. GRE tunneling carries a little bit less overhead with it, so that's something to consider. Other services, though, managed firewall. If you're on the NCREN network, and all 58 colleges are, you can actually have your firewall hosted and configured remotely. Load balancing services are available. So that student registration site that gets slammed, there are a multitude of layer 3, 4, and above load balancing capabilities at the MCNC sites, and they operate on a nonprofit basis. So what that means is we take the cost and of providing the service to you, whatever it is you've designed. We take the cost of that essentially and factor in some replenishment of equipment into that, and then divide that by the term that you want to use the service. No markups, no margin, none of that. So that's a really critical thing. And any of this stuff, pricing. The pricing of this stuff is, as I just described a second ago, it's a little bit complicated. And I told you I took over for Robin Kimball over the summer, so it's almost like they don't trust me telling you the pricing just yet. Eventually they will, so don't worry about that. But you can email me, and it's always best to tell us what your goal is. Very often things get lost in the I don't know, we're staring at the trees and missing the forest sometimes when we focus on, I want a box that does this, and you may have that ready and ready to go. Go ahead and send that to me. But very often it's best to tell us what it is you're trying to achieve, and then we can engineer a solution for you. Very often more cost effective for you. So always use my email address if you're not sure about because. And it can be on this topic or any other, but always use my email address if you're not sure who to contact or where to start. I will get the person in touch with you who will take you to the next step. All right, I'm going to go back to my chat window if I can, and I want to know if there are any questions. There we go. If there are any questions, go ahead and go to the chat window. That should have been enabled. And let's... all right, very good. Well, I hope this session was usable and enjoyable. And As I said, all these sessions are going to be on a YouTube playlist, and so feel free to check those out, and as well as the other topics. If you can't make a future session, feel free to review any of the materials you missed out on. I have no intention of ever taking them down, and I assume Candace Holder, who is really the engineer behind this idea, I assume she's going to leave them up there indefinitely. So I thank everyone for participating, and we will see. Watch your email for the upcoming events. We'll see you again in a few weeks for our next topic.